We are here in the north of Israel in Lake Achula at this beautiful place with the Tamron 150 to 600 millimeter lens. Now this lens has been in the market for over a year now, and this is our first chance to take a look at it. Now we decided to take the lens and test it here in nature, shooting birds, and there are lots and lots of birds here. Researchers believe that over the skies of this place, this nature reserve, fly about 500 million birds per year. Now, obviously not all of them land on the ground around here, but you have a lot of birds that are in this reserve in all the places. You have a lot of water on all the ground around us. And there are birds of all types, both birds of prey, water birds, and other types of birds. Some of them nest here, some of them just migrate through here. Now, you have to understand that Israel is a place, and north of Israel in particular, this place is the middle ground between three different continents. You have Europe on one side, Asia on the other side, and Africa on the bottom. And basically, birds migrate from Europe either to Asia or to mostly to Africa, and then back again. And many of them travel through Israel and through this place, and either nest here some of the time or just pass around. So this is a really great place, and we are going to stay here all day. And throughout the video, throughout the review, we are going to show you a few of the images that we have shot with this lens and a few videos that we shot with this lens as well. So the first thing that we want to talk about is the build quality and the build construction of this lens. Okay, so let's talk about the build quality of the Tamron 150 to 600 millimeter lens. Now the lens has 20 elements arranged in 13 different groups, including 3 ED elements. Now, besides that, the focusing distance of this lens, the minimum focusing distance, is quite long. It's 2.7 meters or 106 inches, which is quite a considerable distance. So if you are trying to shoot this at any length which is close, this is not the lens for you. It starts at 150 millimeters, so it's understandable. Now, the front element, let's put this out. The front element is huge. As you can see here, it's 95 millimeters. So you can put filters on the front of this lens, but they are very big. So this is going to cost you quite a considerable amount of money to get a good quality filter on the front of this lens. But at least you can. On some of the very big lenses, it's probably quite problematic to put filters on the front, so they have drop filters instead. So this is the front part of the lens. This is the hood. It's plasticky, it's not metal, of course, not for the price of this lens, but it does a job. It's okay. So this is in terms of the front element and the hood. Now, in terms of weight, this lens is quite hefty. It's almost 2 kilograms, which is 68 ounces. So it's a heavy lens. It's heavier than a Nikon 80 to 400 millimeter lens. And it's quite heavy to take with you and handhold throughout the day. We have shot handheld with this lens. You can do this. We're going to talk about this more on the autofocus and image quality parts of this review, but taking this lens is, for the most part, the best way to shoot with it is probably going to be with a tripod and a fixed and heavy one at that. So this is in terms of weight. It has a diameter of 105 millimeters, so it's quite thick. It's not as thick as the Nikon 80 to 400 millimeter lens, but it is very long. It's 257 millimeters, or about 10.1 inches in length. And if we open it like this, this was 150, and now we're going, this is 600 millimeters. And now you can look at it without the hood. This is 600 millimeters, and the length in this case is going to be about 12.5 inches or 33 centimeters. So it's quite long when it's open. You do have, when you open it, you do have an option You do have an option to lock it down for travel, which is very useful. So you have the lock button here, which you can lock at 150 millimeters. Besides that, the lens itself, the aperture has 9 blades, and you have mounts which fit both Nikon. We are shooting with, this is the D7100. This is the camera that we shot mostly in this review. We also shot a bit with the D810, but most of our shots were taken with the D7100. It also has a Canon mount and a Sony A mount. So this is in terms of the construction. We can say that generally the construction is pretty good. It's the lens is pretty well built, and besides that, you know, it's not a professional lens, but it's made pretty well. It's solid. We're not sure exactly how much it's going to withstand rain or dust. But for the most part, we had some rainy days. We didn't have any problems. I wouldn't take this to Antarctica or something like that, to a very, very cold and wet place. But for regular day shooting, it should be okay. Okay, so we wanted to add a few things about the switchers and the 2 rings of the lens. The first thing is the upper switch. You have the focus limiter here. This is the full. This will give you the entire range of the focus, and the second state of the switch is 15 meters to infinity. So if you want to shoot birds at longer distance than 15 meters, choose this option. The focus will be faster. The second switch is the autofocus and manual focus switch, like this. And the third one is the VC, or vibration compensation in Tamron's lingo. So you can turn this on and off if you're on a tripod or something like this. Here you have the color lock button. The lens comes with a collar. It's a metal collar, very useful. Not all lenses, especially Nikon on recent years, don't sell all their lenses with the collar attached or with it. You need to purchase it separately. So this is in terms of the color. You have 2 rings. The first is the focus ring, this one. It's pretty smooth, very nice, easy to use. We have used it all in, through the review, very comfortable to use. And you have the zoom ring, which is turned from 150 millimeter up to like this, 600 millimeter. It's harder to turn, which is pretty good for a new lens, because you don't turn it accidentally. But if you don't like to turn to imply force when you turn, this is probably not the best mechanism for you. But other than that, it's pretty useful. So these are the things in terms of the switches and the rings of the 150 millimeter Tamron lens. Okay, so we wanted to talk a bit about the actually working in the field with the 150 to 600 millimeter Tamron lens. Now, the first thing which is really important has to do with working with a steady tripod. Now, we did shoot handheld with this lens as well as with a monopod, but the best option if you want very sharp images, especially at 600 millimeter, is going to be a steady tripod. We're using our Gitsu tripod right here. It's very, very steady. And the second thing is going to be using a good and comfortable to work with head. Now, the best head, which we don't have right here, is a gimbal head. We are actually hoping to do a review of a gimbal head later on this year and to test it and give you some impressions about how to shoot with it and how to use it with a long lens. But in this case, we are just shooting with our normal head on the Gitsu. It's still better than shooting without a tripod or with a very basic tripod or even a monopod. Now, another thing that you need to take into consideration is the focal length. Now, 600 millimeter, if you never shot with 600 millimeter before, or even 500 millimeter, is a very, very long telephoto range. Now, what we're going to show you right now is the reach of 600 millimeter, and maybe you will even be able to see how much stabilization, or actually how much shake there is when you're trying to shoot at such a long focal length, and how important it is to actually use a steady tripod as well as to try and be as stable as possible when actually pressing the button. If you have shutter release, this could be a very good idea, and if you are capable of shooting something which is more stable and doesn't move, you can use the timer as well. This is another option. So let's look at the a longer telephoto, the 600mm, how it actually shoots with this lens. Okay, so we are starting with 150mm, and we are moving way in the focal length until we are reaching, this is 600mm, and as you can see, even the slightest shake is going to be noticeable at this focal length. But if we make the tripod very stable and there is not a lot of wind, you can get a very stable image in this way. What we want to talk about now is the autofocus mechanism and the vibration reduction mechanism of the Tamron 150 to 600mm lens. Now, in terms of autofocusing speed, this is not on the same level as, say, the Nikon 80 to 400mm, which we tested last year. But it's decent. I mean, you can use it. We shot birds with it. It works. It will probably work faster with obviously a faster camera. We have been using this with the D7100 and with the D810, which worked actually faster than this camera, the D7100. So it really depends on the camera that you're using. And of course, you can use the focus limiter to focus faster on more distant objects. So these are things to keep in mind. Now, in terms of the vibration reduction, the VC mechanism, we have seen the same problem that we have seen on the Tamron 16 to 300mm, which we have tested last year. And that is that when you actually focus with the lens, you see a small shake in the viewfinder each time, or at least some of the time when you actually focus with the lens. So it's a bit annoying, but it doesn't bother, it doesn't really bother you that much, or at least it didn't bother us that much, but you can see it when you autofocus with the lens. So this is one thing to keep in mind. Now, the vibration reduction of such a long lens it has a lot of difficulties, especially at 600mm. So don't expect to handhold it and get very sharp images if you're not super stable yourself. And of course, the shooting speed has a lot to do with it. If you're shooting at very fast shutter speed, this will help you. Another thing to keep in mind, of course, is the aperture. This is a 6.3 aperture, f6.3 aperture lens. So it will work best at day. We are here at noon, so it's bright. We have a bright sun. But if you're getting into the early evening, you will find it much more difficult to shoot with this lens, and this is something that we realized pretty quickly. So again, this is the trade-off when you're buying such a relatively low priced lens with such a long focal length. So from here on, we want to talk a bit about the image quality, and then we will sum up this review. For a lot of users, the image quality is probably going to be the most important thing about this lens. Now, this is a relatively inexpensive long telephoto lens, and the question, of course, is how well it performs. In our testing, especially in this lake, but we tested it elsewhere as well, the image quality was fairly good. Even at 600mm, the image quality was very nice. You need to be able, and we talked about this, to make sure that you are shooting from a very stable platform. You're shooting at the correct shutter speed. You need to shoot at a fairly fast shutter speed, again, to reduce the shaking, both of the lens, the camera, and to capture. If you're shooting birds, you obviously need to shoot them at the correct shutter speed. But if all else is working perfectly, you can get very sharp images. Now, you can see on the screen right now quite a few images that we have shot with this lens at various locations, both here and elsewhere. And most of the images that we shot were at 600 millimeter focal length. I would say that about 90% of the images that we shot were at this focal length. Now, we talked about this in the past quite a few times. We actually prefer prime lenses, but sadly, currently, at least for Nikon users, you don't have anything which is beyond 400 millimeter focal length for a relatively inexpensive price. This lens, we will talk about this in the conclusion, is not very expensive. It's about $1,000. So it's the distance between the price of this lens and professional long telephoto lenses is very, very big. So for the price, it's very hard to beat. Now, in the conclusion, we will talk about the Sigma as well, which is a newcomer in this category. So again, we're going to talk in the written review about other aspects of image quality, such as barrel distortion, and the chromatic aberration and other things. But all in all, the image quality, as we said, if all other things are equal, is pretty good. Now, I want to conclude this review of the Tamron 150 to 600 millimeter by talking about the cost effectiveness of this lens. Now, if we were talking about this lens a few months ago, just before Photokina 2014, this would be our first pick for anybody who is looking for a long zoom telephoto lens for inexpensive budgets. But since Photokina, Sigma announced two similar lenses, 150 to 600 millimeter lenses with the same apertures. The first is the Contemporary, which costs just about this lens, just as much as this lens, about $1,000 to $1,100. The Sport model is heavier, much heavier actually, and much more expensive, about twice as much as this lens. Now, we haven't tested any of those, and we are hoping to test at least one of them later on this year. But for the moment, this one is very similar to the Contemporary. We can talk about this lens on its own, and again, when we test the Contemporary Sigma, we can tell you how it differs from this lens. So when we're talking about the Tamron, the image quality is very good, especially for the price, and even not for the price, it's a very good image quality, even at 600 millimeters. You need, as we said, a very stable platform to shoot with, so don't expect to shoot with it handheld and get amazing images straight out. You will need to be very stable. But otherwise, the lens has a very good image quality. The image stabilization is not really amazing. The autofocus is maybe not the fastest in the world, but we can live with both things. What we would like to see in this type of lens is actually a lens which is smaller and especially lighter. This is a fairly heavy lens. It's about 2 kilograms. Walking with this all day here in nature is pretty hard. So you will need a tripod, and this makes the whole thing more probably a bit harder in terms of what you need to carry with you. All in all, we would say that we really recommend this lens if you're looking for a long reach at an inexpensive price. You can read more about it on our full review on lensvid.com.